She was dying alone, until a dog walked through the door and a miracle happened. An heiress trapped in grief, a mansion surrounded by winter, an unexpected visitor, a stray dog. When Claire opens the door to Finn, it's not just the animal that steps inside. It's the beginning of healing, reconciliation, and purpose. Subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The wind swept through the Vermont pines with a sound that seemed to come from another time. Inside, the tall windows of the Ashford mansion groaned with each gust, and the echo of Mr. Howard's footsteps was the only noise that broke the silence. The elderly man, his hair completely white, climbed the staircase carefully, balancing a tray with tea and medicine. In the upstairs bedroom, Claire Ashford sat in the armchair near the fireplace, her body wrapped in a thick wool shawl. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows over the old portraits on the walls. Some days she could barely stand. On others, the fatigue seemed heavier than her own body. The illness the doctors called systemic autoimmune disorder had advanced far too quickly. She had accepted her isolation not out of fear, but exhaustion. Each visit from relatives turned into a disguised act of pity. All that remained to her was the vast house and the loyal company of the old butler, who did everything he could to preserve some semblance of routine. By the end of that afternoon, the sky had closed in. The clouds thickened into a heavy gray mass, and the snow began to fall hard, covering the lawn and the garden statues. Howard shut the windows, lit a few more candles, and adjusted the thermostat while Claire watched the white world outside. It felt as if time itself had stopped. Since leaving the hospital, her life had been confined to a cycle of medicine bottles, remote controls, and books she no longer read. When the clock in the hall struck 7, a stronger gust made the back door creak. The cold wind rushed into the corridor, carrying with it a strange sound, a rough, hoarse bark from outside. Howard hurried toward the kitchen and found something unexpected. A soaked dog, trembling, standing on the rug. His fur was brown and white, his ribs visible, and his eyes watchful, wary, yet pleading. Howard grabbed a towel, trying to shoo the animal back into the storm. "Go on, get out, you can't stay here." The dog took a step back, but didn't run. He stood still, tail tucked, eyes fixed on the butler as if begging for permission. Claire heard the commotion and, with effort, descended to the foyer, holding tightly to the banister. The sight of the wet, shivering animal stopped her halfway down the stairs. "Let him in," she said hoarsely, almost in a whisper. Howard hesitated. "He's filthy, Mississippi." "So am I," she replied with a faint, tired smile. The butler sighed and handed her the towel. Claire knelt with difficulty and began drying the dog's fur with slow, gentle movements. The animal closed his eyes, perfectly still, as if he understood that this touch wasn't a threat. It was kindness. The fire still burned in the hearth when Claire returned to her chair. The dog lay at her feet, breathing heavily, as though he had finally found shelter after a long journey. Howard stood at a distance, watching in silence. He served her tea, turned off a few lights, and quietly left him alone, surrounded by the soft crackle of the flames. The mansion, so used to monotony, seemed to breathe in a different rhythm. Claire watched the dog sleep, his chest rising and falling steadily. The clock neared midnight, and the storm outside showed no sign of easing. She pulled the shawl up to her neck and felt a warmth that didn't come from the fire, but from the living presence beside her, a silent, breathing creature that somehow understood everything words could not express. The next morning, the quiet of the hallway was broken by an unfamiliar sound. Light footsteps on the wooden floor. Startled, Howard rushed downstairs and found the dog exploring the house. The animal stopped in front of a large family portrait hanging above the staircase, an old photograph of Claire as a child, smiling between her parents. He stared at it, then turned toward her as she appeared behind him, leaning on a cane. "Curious, isn't it?" she murmured. The dog approached slowly, pressed his nose against her hand, and wagged his tail. From a distance, Howard watched, surprised to see her face softer, less pale. Claire asked him to leave some food and water in the corner of the kitchen. The dog ate quietly, then returned to the living room and laid down again near the fire, as if he already knew that this was his place. For the rest of the day, Claire kept the animal close while she read the company correspondence. He slept curled up on the rug. When she stood up to take her medicine, he followed with small, cautious steps, attentive to her every move. Howard muttered something about fur and muddy paw prints, but didn't have the heart to argue. The dog seemed to change the air of the house itself. The faint sound of his breathing replaced the relentless ticking of the clock. At dusk, Claire asked that the door be left slightly open, in case he wanted to leave, but he didn't. He stayed beside her, his head resting on the foot of the armchair. Outside, the snow began to fall again, and the entire house seemed protected by that small fragment of life that, uninvited, had brought back something no one could quite name. The day began with a timid sun, filtered through the fog windows of the mansion. The snow piled on the balconies reflected a pale light, and the sound of branches snapping outside was the only sign of movement. Claire woke feeling lighter, as if the fever that clung to her for months had finally eased. When she opened her eyes, she saw the dog lie on the rug, watching her with quiet attention. As she stood up, he approached slowly, tail wagging, waiting for approval. Howard appeared at the door with a breakfast tray. "He spent the whole night in your room," he said in a tone that sounded almost reproachful. Claire just smiled. "Let him stay." The butler didn't argue. He served the tea, collected the medicine, and left, unsure what to think of the scene he hadn't witnessed in months. His mistress standing, brushing her hair, changing her nightgown for a robe, and gazing out the window as if remembering there was still a world beyond the curtains. When Dr. Miles Preston arrived for his routine visit, he expected to find the same frail, lifeless patient as always. He was used to seeing Claire motionless, with dark circles under her eyes and answers reduced to single syllables. But when he crossed the living room, what he saw made him stop at the doorway. The heiress was kneeling on the floor, brush in hand, with the dog stretched out in front of her. She was speaking softly as she combed his fur, her voice calm and steady. "You don't seem to like this, but you'll get used to it," she said, while the animal closed his eyes, resigned. Miles watched, astonished. "Looks like we have a new resident," he said, trying to mask his surprise. Claire looked up, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "He showed up during the storm. I didn't have the heart to turn him away." The doctor approached, inspecting the dog with curiosity. "You know, there are studies showing animals can help reduce pain and anxiety." She laughed, unconvinced. "I doubt a dog can cure what medicine can't." Miles opened his notebook, jotting a few notes while observing her skin. Less pale, no trace of the cold sweat that marked her crises. Her breathing was more even too. "Maybe not cure, but it helps balance the body. Lowers cortisol, improves mood," he explained in a light tone, careful not to sound too clinical. Claire tilted her head, intrigued but skeptical. "So he's my new treatment?" "Maybe the most effective one yet," Miles replied with a grin. Howard entered with a blanket, but the dog moved first, jumping onto the sofa beside his mistress and resting his head on her lap. "See," said Miles, jotting another note. "He knows exactly where he's needed." Claire looked down at the dog and ran her fingers through his still damp fur. "I think his name is Finn," she murmured. "Finn," the doctor repeated. "Good choice. It comes from Finn in Gaelic. It means fair, pure, though I'd say today it means luck." Claire laughed at the coincidence, and Howard, trying not to show it, smiled too. That night, the wind began to howl again, but the house no longer felt so cold. Claire went to bed early, Finn curled near the fireplace. As the fire burned low, she realized something unusual. The pounding headache that came every night simply didn't appear. She stayed awake for a while, waiting for the sharp pain in her chest, the tingling in her hands, the heaviness that kept her from sleeping, but nothing came. The room was peaceful. She drifted off to the sound of the dog's breathing, a steady rhythm that somehow matched her own. Passing through the hallway, Howard peeked through the half-open door and froze. Seeing his mistress sleeping without a trace of pain brought tears to his eyes. He closed the door quietly, whispering something like a prayer, and descended the stairs in silence. The days that followed brought small but noticeable changes, and Miles saw them right away. Claire began coming to breakfast on her own, walking slowly but without help. The dog followed her everywhere, In the study, he lay near her chair. In the kitchen, he waited while she prepared simple meals. In the garden, he paced beside her on the snow-covered veranda. Miles's visits became shorter but more frequent. Each time he came, his patience seemed a little stronger. Her skin had color again. Her gaze was clear. During one visit, he said, maybe it's not a miracle, just an emotional response. The body heals when it feels safe. Claire replied, so the secret is trust. Miles nodded and wrote her words down, thinking there was more truth in that sentence than in many medical papers he'd read. Howard, the quiet observer of it all, watched them talk with a mix of joy and melancholy. He remembered the days when Claire filled the house with laughter, when her father was still alive and Christmas parties crowded the great hall. Seeing that light return, even in small sparks, felt like witnessing a quiet miracle unfold before his eyes. The mansion no longer resembled a tomb. The sound of barking now echoed to the corridors, mingled with the shuffle of slippers and brief exchanges between patient and doctor. Sometimes Claire picked up a book and read aloud, with Finn lying at her feet as if testing her voice again. The echo of her words filled the empty spaces, making the house hum with a new warmth. No one spoke of it, but everyone felt it. Something was changing, and it wasn't just the weather. The morning dragged on slowly, the wind tapping at the windows and the sound of dripping water echoing from the eaves of the mansion. Claire sat in the library, wrapped in a blanket, a cup of tea beside her. Finn was stretched out on the rug, his nose resting on his paws, breathing in gentle intervals that filled the silence. The fire in the hearth still burned, casting an orange glow over the rows of dusty books. Claire watched the dog and, for reasons she couldn't explain, felt an urge to move, to do something that would break the stillness that had defined her days. Her gaze fell upon a small door in the corner of the room, an entrance to the basement, locked since the day her father's body had been brought home from the city. That part of the house held memories she had long avoided, but sudden curiosity overpowered the hesitation. Slowly, leaning on her cane, she stood and opened the door. Cold air and the scent of old wood enveloped her. Finn perked his ears, followed her to the top of the stairs, and waited for her to go down. The wooden steps creaked under her light steps. When she flipped the switch, the dim bulb hanging from the ceiling revealed stacks of boxes, furniture draped in sheets, and shelves cluttered with forgotten objects. Claire ran her fingers through the dust, recognizing fragments of another time. A scratched globe, her father's old safe, framed photographs. In the corner, a pile of boxes neatly labeled caught her attention. Ashford Foundation letters read the slanted, firm handwriting of her father. She knelt with effort and opened one of the lids. Inside were hundreds of yellowed envelopes and videotapes, labeled with names she didn't recognize. She picked up the first letter, dated 1996, and began to read. It was from a schoolteacher thanking the foundation for donating supplies to her rural classroom. The second was from a family whose child had received life-saving treatment through one of the foundation's scholarships. The letters were filled with gratitude, hope, and faith in a man Claire had only known as stern and distant. Time seemed suspended as she read. Each envelope opened revealed a part of a man she had never truly known. The father who corrected her with cold precision at dinner, who demanded perfection and rarely smiled, was the same man funding education, treatment, and rebuilding efforts quietly, without seeking recognition. Claire's eyes burned as tears blurred the ink on the page. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she whispered, holding one of the letters in trembling hands. Finn came closer, lying down beside her and resting his muzzle on her knee, letting out a small, sympathetic sound. She looked at him and, for a fleeting moment, felt as if he understood the turmoil inside her. She cried silently, her fingers buried in his warm fur, surrounded by letters scattered across the floor. Her tears carried not only grief but something else, relief, as if each one washed away a little of what had been misunderstood for so long. When she finally managed to breathe deeply again, she began stacking the letters carefully. She spent hours in that basement, sorting, reading, organizing the tapes by date. On one, the label read Project Horizon 2008. She inserted it into an old player, and a shaky image revealed her father in a meeting with doctors and volunteers. He spoke passionately about funding research for rare diseases. His words were firm, but his tone carried warmth she didn't remember. Claire covered her face with her hands, remembering how many times she had accused him of caring only about money. The sound of the wind outside brought her back. She climbed the stairs with the boxes in her arms and placed them on the office table. The fire had gone out, and the cold was returning. Finn sat by her chair, watching. "He wasn't the man I thought he was," she whispered. The dog tilted his head, as if urging her to go on, and I don't know what to do with that. In the following days, Claire dove into the past with an energy Howard hadn't seen in years. She reorganized her father's office, wiped the dust off the shelves, replaced the heavy curtains with lighter ones. The musty smell gave way to the scent of tea and polished wood. Among papers and folders, she discovered projects abandoned after her father's death, shelters, scholarships, rehabilitation centers. She called the family's accountant, requesting old financial reports from the foundation. The man hesitated, saying those documents were now under the control of Richard Ashford, her uncle, who had taken over the board after her father's passing. The mention of his name brought back unpleasant memories. Richard had always considered charitable work a weakness, a waste of the family's resources. Claire took a slow breath and replied firmly, "Send me whatever you can. I need to understand what was stopped." 2 days later, a black car pulled up in front of the mansion. Howard announced a visitor with a tense expression. Richard entered without invitation, his overcoat still dusted with snow. His face carried that rehearsed confidence of a man too used to power. "I hear you've been digging into old matters," he began, leaning his hands on the desk. Claire remained seated, the paper spread before her. "I'm reviewing my father's foundation reports." He let out a short, dismissive laugh. "The foundation? That's ancient history, my dear. Your father was a dreamer, and dreams don't pay the bills. I saved the Ashford Empire from becoming a joke." Claire met his eyes, her voice calm but steady. "Maybe you saved the money, but you lost the soul." Richard's smile faded. "Those sentimental causes nearly destroyed this family. I hope you don't plan to repeat his mistakes." She gathered the letters, stacked them neatly, and said evenly, "I plan to continue what he started." Richard studied her for a few seconds, testing how far he could push her. That cold, commanding stare that once made her retreat no longer had any effect. "You don't have the health or the experience for this," he said sharply. Claire drew a slow breath, her hands resting firmly on the envelopes. "My health is returning. Experience can be learned. And as for conscience, mine's intact." The man exhaled in irritation, turned, and walked to the door. "I hope you know what you're doing. Business doesn't forgive mistakes." When the sound of his car disappeared down the road, Claire stayed still, her heart pounding. Finn rested his head on her lap and closed his eyes peacefully. She stroked his muzzle and whispered, "He believed in doing good, and so do I." Outside, the wind howled through the trees, but inside the mansion, the fire was burning again. The January cold felt endless. The sky stayed gray from dawn until nightfall, and the wind howled through the cracks of the old mansion, moaning between the heavy doors. Claire no longer ventured into the garden, as she had in the weeks before. Her body began to fail her again, low fever, aching joints, the same familiar exhaustion creeping back. She tried to ignore the symptoms, but her hands trembled when she held a cup of tea, and her breathing grew shallow with even the slightest effort. Howard noticed it in the slow movements, in the color draining from her face. "You should call the doctor," he said firmly. "It's just the dry air," she replied, trying to hide her discomfort. But that afternoon, as she crossed the hallway toward her father's office, the world went dark before her eyes. Her body gave out, and she collapsed without a sound. The thud echoed through the house, and Howard rushed upstairs. He found her on the floor, her skin cold, lips pale. "Miss Claire," he shouted, kneeling beside her. Finn appeared moments later, barking frantically, circling his fallen owner. Miles arrived about half an hour later, carrying a portable medical kit. The mansion was steeped in tension. Howard had moved his mistress back to her bed, covered in thick blankets. The doctor examined her carefully, checking her temperature, pulse, and oxygen levels. Her immune system has crashed, he muttered, jotting down numbers. She needs complete rest, no exertion, and constant supervision. Howard nodded, eyes brimming. And the dog? He asked, pointing at Finn, who was lying at the foot of the bed, watching every movement. Let him stay. If you try to remove him, he won't allow it. Miles hesitated, but soon realized the animal was calmer than either of them. All right, he said, as long as he doesn't disturb her. Claire remained unconscious for most of the day. The floor was adjusted. The curtains stayed drawn, and the crackling of the fire was the only sound through the night. Finn never left her side, shifting only to nestle closer to her body. In the small hours, Howard got up to check her vitals. The lamp's weak glow barely reached the bed, and the wind sighed softly outside. He approached and checked the heart monitor, and froze. The readings were erratic, her heartbeat speeding up and slowing down unpredictably. Then, as if responding to something unseen, Finn stood, climbed onto bed, and lay against her, his warm body pressed close to hers. Within seconds, the beeping on the monitor steadied. Howard blinked, convinced it was coincidence. He waited, watching as the pattern repeated. Every time the dog moved away, her vitals fluctuated. Every time he returned, they stabilized. He noted the times, observing until dawn with a tightness in his chest and a haunting feeling that he was witnessing something medicine might never explain. When Miles returned that morning, Howard told him everything he'd seen. The doctor listened quietly, skeptical but unable to hide his astonishment. Miles examined Claire again and ordered new blood tests. 2 days later, the results defied all logic. Her inflammatory markers had dropped by nearly half, and her white blood cell count, previously critical, had climbed back into the normal range. That's impossible in so little time, he murmured, comparing the charts. Howard glanced at the dog lying on the rug, as if the answer were right there. Claire awoke later that afternoon, pale but lucid. She moved her fingers, lifted her head slightly, and saw Finn beside her. The dog wagged his tail slowly, as if he'd been waiting for her to open her eyes. You stayed the whole time, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Finn barked softly, a restrained sound. Miles approached with his stethoscope, checked her pressure, and shook his head in disbelief. If I hadn't seen it myself, I wouldn't believe it, he said. The results show remarkable improvement. Your body's responding in ways we can't explain. Howard folded his arms, his tone gentle. Maybe it's not science, doctor. Maybe it's affection. The following days passed in a rhythm of rest and quiet victories. Claire managed to sit up on her own, then take a few steps to the window. Her face regained color, and her eyes slowly brightened. Miles visited daily, intrigued by her progress. Each time he entered the room, Finn was there, alert, almost protective. He's your bodyguard now, he joked, masking his awe. Claire smiled, her voice still weak, but steady. Maybe he's more than that. In the afternoons, she would read aloud passages from the letters she had found in the basement, as though sharing them with her father, wherever he might be. The dog listened intently, unmoving, his gaze fixed on her. Sometimes Howard would pause by the doorway, listening to the soft rhythm of her voice, something he hadn't heard in months, and feel his throat tighten. By late February, the snow began to melt. The garden, once frozen and lifeless, showed hints of green beneath the thaw. Claire went downstairs with Howard's help, while Finn trotted through the house with renewed energy. Miles watched with the look of a man trying to make sense of the impossible. Medicine will call me crazy if I write about this, he joked while taking her vitals. Claire smiled faintly. Write it anyway. Maybe the world needs stories science can't yet explain. Howard, standing by the window, let out a short laugh. Sometimes it's just the heart reminding the body that life is still worth it. Miles nodded, glancing toward Finn by the fireplace. Maybe that's exactly it. And for the first time in a long while, the sound of laughter filled the room, light and genuine, spreading through the house that had once known only the echo of the wind. The wind blew fiercely that morning, dragging fine snow across the mansion gates. Claire was in the study, reviewing the foundation's paperwork when Howard entered, his face pale. He's here. That was all it took for the air to grow heavy. Richard Ashford walked in without knocking, his dark coat covered in snowflakes, his expression twisted with anger. "I heard about your latest stroke of genius," he said, slamming a folder onto the desk. "Donating family assets? Reopening failed schools? Are you really going to throw away everything we built?" Claire remained calm, her hands resting on the wooden surface. "It's not waste, it's restoration. Money sitting idle doesn't honor the name we inherited." Richard leaned closer, his voice low and sharp. "You're in no condition to make decisions. And if you insist, I'll prove it." Before she could respond, he turned toward Howard. "You know she needs supervision. What are you waiting for? Protect her from herself." Howard straightened, steady and firm. "Protect her? That's exactly what I'm doing." The threat became real a few days later. A courier delivered a legal notice. Richard had filed for guardianship, claiming Claire was mentally unfit to manage her affairs. Miles arrived shortly after, outraged. "He can't do this. The reports clearly show you're improving." Claire, composed, replied, "He's afraid. And when people are afraid, they try to control what they don't understand." Miles looked at her with a mix of pride and concern. "You're going to have to face him, Claire." "I know." She spent the rest of the night writing short notes, letters, words she wanted to say but feared she might not have the strength to speak. Finn stayed curled at her feet, alert to her every move. At dawn, the family lawyer arrived with instructions and a hearing time. Howard helped her get dressed. The simple blue wool dress contrasted with her pale skin, but her eyes held steady resolve. Before leaving, she bent down with effort and stroked the dog's head. "Come on, Finn. It's time." The courtroom was crowded. Reporters lined the walls, eager to capture the image. The frail heiress in a wheelchair, accompanied by a dog. Richard sat in the front row, flanked by his lawyers, the confident smirk of a man certain of victory. The judge called the session to order. Richard's attorney spoke at length, reciting outdated diagnoses, hospital records, and distorted statements, claiming Claire could no longer distinguish reason from emotion. She kept her gaze on her hands the entire time. Behind her, Miles clenched his fists, silent but seething. When it was time for the defense, her attorney requested that Claire speak for herself. The judge hesitated, studying the fragile-looking woman before him. Claire drew a deep breath and, gripping the armrest, began to rise. The motion was slow, tense, but determined. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Standing before the silent room, Claire pulled a neatly folded piece of paper from her pocket. It was one of the notes found in the basement, handwritten by her father. "My father left many words behind," she began, her voice steady. "But this one says it all." She unfolded the paper and read aloud. "True wealth is a good that continues when a name no longer matters." For a long moment, no one moved. The reporter stopped typing, and the sentence seemed to hang in the air. She continued, "I am not sick. I am alive. And I want to finish what he started." The words came out simple, but filled with conviction. The judge studied her for a few seconds, then turned to Richard, who avoided his gaze. In a calm but decisive tone, the judge said, "There is no legal basis for guardianship. The petition is denied." The gavel struck, and the case was closed. Richard rose, his face flushed with anger, and stormed out with his attorneys trailing behind. Back at the mansion, the silence felt different, not the kind born of isolation, but of relief. Miles and Howard prepared tea in the kitchen, exchanging quiet smiles. "She won," Howard said, handing over a cup. "No," Miles replied, smiling softly. "She won against herself." Upstairs, Claire sat in the lounge, a blanket over her legs, gazing at the fire. Finn was curled beside her, his muzzle resting on her lap. She ran her hands slowly through his fur, feeling the warmth of that loyal body breathing in rhythm with her own. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Finn opened his eyes, lifted his head, and gave a single soft bark, as if in response. Then he laid his muzzle over her hand and went back to sleep. Claire kept her eyes on the flames, letting the calm fill the space where pain once lived. Howard entered soon after with a steaming cup of tea. "The doctor said he'll come by tomorrow for follow-up tests," he announced. "Good," she replied, without looking away from the dog. He deserved a checkup too. Howard smiled, eyes glistening. I think he's already passed them all. Miles appeared in the doorway, coat over his arm. We'll keep monitoring, but all signs point to stable recovery, he said. Claire nodded faintly in gratitude. The doctor looked at Finn, shaking his head with quiet wonder. You know, Claire, we may never find a name for what happened here, but today I learned something. Not everything that heals comes from a lab. She looked at the sleeping dog and replied softly, and not everything that saves needs words. The fire crackled. The tea filled the air with its warmth, and the house breathed in peace. Winter still ruled outside, but within those walls, healing had already found its home. Spring arrived like a promise, finally kept. The trees around the Asher estate, once bare and silent, now bloomed with new leaves, and the garden came alive in shades of lilac and white. The air, once sharp and cold, carried the fragrance of magnolias and the soft hum of bees. Claire walked slowly along the veranda, leaning on a light cane. The treatments and physical therapy had restored strength to her steps and calm to her eyes. Her body still held invisible scars, but her spirit was awake. Miles stayed close, sometimes as her doctor, sometimes as something deeper, something neither of them dared to name. Howard, now retired, remained nearby, tending the gardens with the same care one gives to a cherished memory. In the middle of the lawn, Finn ran free, his coat glistening in the sun, carrying a stick between his teeth as if celebrating the life that had bloomed around him. The old guest wing of the mansion had been transformed into wide, sunlit rooms that smelled of fresh wood. Bronze plaques gleamed on the walls, marking the beginning of a new era. The Finn Foundation assisted therapy and emotional rehabilitation. Patients came from nearby towns, accompanied by volunteers and therapists. The place seemed to breathe hope. Children in wheelchairs smiled as trained dogs approached gently. Adults in recovery walked to the garden, hand in hand with their guides. Claire watched it all with tearful eyes, barely able to believe that this once cold, silent house was now a place of healing. Miles stood beside her and whispered, "It's beautiful to see life taking over where emptiness used to live." She nodded, her gaze lost among the laughter and movement. "It's what my father wanted all along. I just needed time and Finn to understand it." The opening ceremony took place on a clear afternoon. Local newspapers and small TV stations attended. But Claire didn't seem to care about the cameras. She spoke with confidence, her voice steady and warm. "For years, I believed that pain defined me," she said to the crowd gathered in the garden. "But life showed me that love heals too. And sometimes it walks in unannounced, on four legs, with eyes that understand what we can't say." The audience applauded. Some wiped tears discreetly. Finn, sitting beside the podium, perked his ears at the sound of his name and barked once, drawing gentle laughter from the crowd. Miles, standing beside her, placed a hand on her shoulder, and Claire met his gaze with quiet gratitude. From the back, Howard dabbed his eyes with his handkerchief. When the ceremony ended, Claire strolled to the courtyard, Finn keeping pace beside her. Patients reached out to pet him, and he greeted each one calmly, wagging his tail as if he understood that his new purpose was to share the lessons of affection and loyalty he'd lived. Miles said goodbye to guests, and Howard handed out flowers from the garden to the children. The mansion, once a symbol of isolation, had become the beating heart of a project that joined science and empathy. That night, when silence returned, Claire sat on the veranda with a light shawl around her shoulders. Finn lay beside her, his muzzle resting on her lap. The sky was clear, and the air carried the scent of damp earth. She ran her fingers through his fur, gazing at the horizon. Memories came back in flashes. The cold of lonely nights, the sound of her body hitting the hallway floor, the doctor's visits, the warmth of the animal that had restored her balance. All of it felt distant now, yet vividly alive in her mind. Miles stepped outside, carrying 2 mugs of tea, and sat next to her. "You know you made the news again," he said with a teasing smile. "This time for all the right reasons." She laughed softly. "I hope they're saying I did something worthwhile." "They're saying more than that," he replied. "They're saying you proved faith can be practical." Claire looked at him, then at Finn, who was sleeping peacefully. "All I did was open the door to love. and it came in on 4 paws. Miles took her hand, and for a while neither of them spoke. The sound of the wind moving through the trees said everything. When the clock struck 9, Howard turned off the garden lights and bid them good night before heading upstairs. The veranda fell into gentle darkness, lit only by the moon. Claire leaned her head back in the chair and watched the dog breathe in a slow, steady rhythm. The house that had once been haunted by grief was now a home. The windows that had long been shut to the world stood open, letting the fresh air flow through. Finn sighed and shifted to the side, and she covered him with the edge of her shawl. "You brought me back," she murmured. Outside, a cricket sang among the leaves. The sound was soft, almost imperceptible, yet enough to remind her that life never truly stops. It just waits to be welcomed again. Claire closed her eyes, and her final thought before sleep was calm and certain. Life always finds a way to return. Sometimes, it just needs someone willing to wait for it. The end. So, what did you think of this story? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to keep enjoying stories like this one. See you next time.